For over 36 years, a homeless man made a remarkable decision to collect every aluminum can he found. From the age of 14, he noticed cans scattered across the streets, sidewalks, and parks, and began picking them up. It was simple. He would later say, "I just bent down, grabbed them, and kept going." What started as a modest daily task turned into a lifelong mission. No matter the weather or circumstance, he walked with his eyes trained on the ground, constantly on the lookout for his next discovery. As the years passed, his collection grew. First, it filled up old grocery bags. Then, it overwhelmed the few corners of shelter he could find. Eventually, the sheer number of cans was too much. He scavenged a few burlap sacks from a nearby factory, hoping they'd help contain the haul, but they weren't enough. Then, while wandering through a forgotten area of the city, he stumbled upon an abandoned shipping container. It was rusty, weathered, and largely hidden from view, a perfect place to store his cans. Over time, the container filled to the brim with aluminum treasures, each one representing a step of his journey. By the end of 36 years, he had accumulated over 1.5 million cans. But for him, they weren't just scrap metal, they were symbols of persistence, hope, and quiet survival. Every can had a story. Some were collected on blistering summer days, others on nights when icy winds cut through his thin jacket. He remembered the stray cats he fed with scraps he found, the brief chats with other wanderers like himself, and the silent companionship of the cans. Finally, after years of collecting, he knew it was time. With the help of a kind passerby who offered him a truck, he transported his massive collection to a nearby recycling center. When he arrived, jaws dropped. The staff stared in disbelief as the man unloaded sack after sack, cart after cart. "How did you manage to collect all these?" the recycling center owner asked in awe. The man smiled softly. "This is my life's work. Each can I picked up was a little piece of hope. I just kept going." The staff began counting the cans. It took hours. During that time, the man's mind wandered back to the cold nights he spent on the streets, the times he wondered if all this effort would ever amount to anything. He thought about the people who had passed him by, not knowing the quiet work he was doing, and the sense of purpose that had kept him going even when the world seemed so indifferent. At last, the tally was complete. The man stood by as the owner of the recycling center, still shocked, announced that the total cash value was far more than anyone expected. The man's eyes welled with tears, not from the money, but from the realization of what those decades had meant. His years of unseen labor had not been in vain. Without hesitation, he decided to use the money to help others who, like him, were struggling. He bought warm food, coats, and blankets for the homeless. It wasn't about finally having wealth. It was about sharing what he had learned: resilience, hope, and the belief that even small actions could make a big difference. With this act, he continued to impact others, spreading love and hope to people who needed it most. His life's meaning had always been there, hidden in those cans, every one a small piece of the puzzle that told the story of perseverance, kindness, and the quiet power of one man's determination to leave the world a better place. As the homeless man distributed food and warm clothing to others in need, he found himself surrounded by grateful faces. These weren't just strangers, they were people who, like him, had spent years battling the cold, hunger, and uncertainty of life on the streets. Many of them recognized him. He had always been a quiet presence in the community, someone who never asked for much, but had always been willing to lend a hand or share whatever little he had. Word of his incredible act spread through the city. Soon, local news outlets wanted to interview him, and people from all walks of life were inspired by his story. But when asked for interviews, he would simply smile and decline. "It's not about me," he would say. "It's about what we can all do when we don't give up." Despite the sudden attention, he remained humble. He didn't seek fame or recognition. In fact, when a local charity offered him a place to stay, he thanked them but declined, saying, "I have my own path." For him, the journey wasn't over, it had simply transformed into something new. The act of collecting cans had taught him discipline, patience, and a sense of purpose, and now, he wanted to pass those lessons on to others. He began spending his days in shelters, not to sleep, but to volunteer. He talked to people who were in the same place he had been, offering them encouragement and small acts of kindness. Whenever someone was feeling hopeless, he would tell them about the cans, how every small action can lead to something bigger, something meaningful, even if it takes years to see it. His story began to inspire change. A local school started a recycling program in his honor, with students learning about the importance of caring for the environment. They called it the Can Man Project. Community leaders also took notice, organizing neighborhood cleanups and creating resources to help the homeless population find employment and housing. All of this stemmed from one man's quiet, persistent work over the years. As time passed, the man became a symbol of resilience in his city. People would stop him on the street to offer their thanks, to share their own stories of struggle, or just to shake his hand. But for him, it was never about being a hero. It was about the belief that anyone, no matter their circumstances, could make a difference. Each can he had collected was a reminder of that simple truth. In his later years, he was finally able to afford a small, modest apartment. It wasn't much, but to him, it was more than he had ever dreamed. From his window, he could see the streets he had once walked, his eyes scanning the ground for cans. Now, instead of searching for aluminum, he spent his time thinking of new ways to help others. He began writing letters to local businesses, asking them to donate food and clothing to shelters, and he even started a small community garden, teaching others how to grow their own vegetables. Even though his circumstances had improved, the man remained true to the values that had carried him through those difficult years. He continued to live simply, giving away most of what he had, always putting others before himself. Years later, when the man passed away, the city mourned the loss of their quiet hero. But his legacy lived on in the lives he had touched, the community he had strengthened, and the countless aluminum cans he had saved from the streets. At his memorial, people gathered to share stories of how his simple acts of kindness had changed their lives. Children who had learned about him in school came forward, holding small cans in their hands, a symbol of his lasting impact. In the end, the man's life was a testament to the power of persistence, kindness, and hope. He had spent 36 years collecting cans, but in doing so, he had collected something far more valuable, a community built on love, compassion, and the belief that no one is too small to make a difference. His story became an inspiration, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts, done with great care, can leave the biggest mark on the world. After the man's passing, his legacy continued to ripple through the community in unexpected and beautiful ways. The Can Man Project, which had started as a simple recycling program in local schools, grew into a city-wide initiative. Schools, businesses, and households all participated in an annual event now named the Can Man Challenge. Every year, people from all over the city would spend a day collecting recyclables, not just aluminum cans, but plastic bottles, cardboard, and other materials. The proceeds from the recycling were donated to homeless shelters, food banks, and environmental organizations, helping thousands of people in need. Beyond its environmental impact, the Can Man Challenge became a day of unity. Families walked together, chatting with neighbors they had never met before, and children raced to see who could collect the most cans. Volunteers shared stories about the man who had inspired it all, reminding everyone that the event wasn't just about recycling, it was about hope, perseverance, and community spirit. The man's small apartment, which had once been a humble refuge for him, was transformed into a community center named the Can Man's Corner. Inside, visitors could find a small museum dedicated to his life, complete with pictures, letters, and a few of the burlap sacks he had used to carry his cans. A section of the shipping container where he stored his cans had even been relocated to the center, serving as a symbol of the dedication and resourcefulness he had shown in his mission. The space also offered workshops on sustainability, urban gardening, and job training for people who were trying to rebuild their lives, just as the man had done. But perhaps the most profound impact of his story was the inspiration it gave to those who were still struggling. People who were down on their luck, who had lost their homes or jobs, began to see the man's life as proof that their circumstances didn't define their potential. His persistence, his belief in the power of small actions, and his unwavering hope resonated deeply with those who felt overlooked by society. Many began to reach out for help, enrolling in job programs, volunteering at shelters, and finding new ways to contribute to their community. His example sparked a wave of resilience in people who had once felt defeated. Among those he inspired was a young man named Jason, who had been homeless for several years. Jason, like many, had heard of the Can Man but had never met him. After learning about his story, Jason began collecting cans not out of desperation, but as a tribute to the man who had shown him that even small, consistent efforts could make a difference. He found purpose in the routine, and soon, like the man before him, he began to accumulate his own stockpile of aluminum. Along the way, Jason met people who were willing to help him, and step by step, he started to turn his life around. One day, Jason walked into the Can Man's corner with a bag full of cans. He approached the volunteer coordinator and offered to donate the cans to the center. The volunteer smiled and thanked him, asking how he had heard of the Can Man. Jason hesitated for a moment, then said, "He saved me, in a way. I never met him, but he gave me hope when I had none." From that day on, Jason became a regular volunteer at the center, eventually finding a stable job and his own place to live. As years passed, the Can Man's story became more than just a local legend. It spread beyond the city. Documentaries were made, and his life story was shared on national news. People across the country were moved by his unwavering determination and humble spirit. Inspired by the Can Man's journey, cities in other states began to adopt similar recycling and community service programs. His message that small acts of kindness and persistence can lead to profound change became a rallying cry for anyone facing adversity. But despite the widespread recognition, in the hearts of those who knew him best, the Can Man remained the same, a quiet, thoughtful soul who simply wanted to make the world a little better, one can at a time. And so, his story lived on, not just in the programs, events, and memorials, but in the countless lives he touched. His life was a reminder that even the smallest of actions, when done with love and purpose, can create a ripple that grows far beyond what we ever imagined. In the end, the Can Man left behind something far more valuable than money or fame. He left behind a legacy of hope, kindness, and the belief that no matter how small we may feel, we all have the power to change the world.